Under the heavy gray sky of an Ohio November, I stood alone beside my wife's coffin, the rain pinning my jacket to my bones and running off the faded canopy above us. The world was quiet except for the soft thudding of raindrops on the artificial grass rolled out for mourners' shoes, and for a moment, I was just a nameless, shivering old man staring down at the last good thing in his life. There was nothing left to say. Every condolence had been said twice over, every floral arrangement already wilted at the edges. The whole service was barely over before people started to drift away, umbrellas bobbing like black flowers against the somber hill. It was only then, as the crowd thinned, that I heard the words that would cut deeper than any loss I'd ever felt before. Micah's voice wasn't meant for me, but it sliced through the soft rain like a razor. I heard it clear as day, drifting through the hush, as he leaned close to Naomi, his wife, the woman who never called me dad. Now it's just the old man left. Once he's out of the way, everything else falls into place. Naomi's hand squeezed his arm and she barely glanced at the casket. We just need to be smart about it. He's got no one else. It'll be easy. For a split second, I thought I'd misheard, that maybe grief was twisting everything, poisoning the world the way it had poisoned my son. But there was no mistaking the cold calculation in Micah's tone or the way Naomi's lips curled with satisfaction. I felt myself fade into the background, invisible among the last guests leaving, the only witness to my own erasure. My hands trembled on the edge of the casket, but I locked my jaw and stared ahead, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I thought about calling out, about letting my rage spill out there on the sodden cemetery grass, but I stayed silent. I'd been silent for most of my life, working overtime, never complaining about missed birthdays or holidays spent fixing what broke in our old house, just to keep my family afloat. I knew what it was to swallow pain and wear a smile. Rainwater pooled at my feet as I remembered the day we bought our house. 40 years ago, when Eleanor laughed in the golden light, tracing the outlines of where we'd put the kitchen, where the Christmas tree would go. I was 32 then, with calloused hands and the stubborn certainty that if I just worked hard enough, love would last. I poured every hour I had into that house, into those people, thinking it would be enough. Standing at her grave, all I could see was how far I'd fallen out of their world. Micah's words kept circling in my head as I watched them slip away under their umbrella. Naomi in her designer coat, not even pretending to mourn. They reached their black BMW and I saw Micah's posture shift, his shoulders relaxing, as if the day was finally going his way. I gripped the edge of the casket until my fingers ached, feeling the beginnings of something new forming in my chest. Not just pain, but a kind of electric, frigid clarity. A neighbor touched my arm, Mrs. Flannery, her voice gentle with the weight of age and real sympathy. She was a good woman, Ellen. I nodded, but my gaze never left Micah as he disappeared from view. You take care of yourself, she said. I said nothing. I drove home alone, the windshield wipers beating a rhythm that matched the pounding in my chest. The old blue Chevy rolled down the same streets I'd driven for decades, passing the Little League field, the bakery Eleanor used to love, and the vacant storefronts that kept multiplying every year. The town was empty now, emptied out by time and disappointment, but my house waited on the corner, looking exactly as it always had, the only place left in the world that still belonged to me. But even the house felt different as I pulled into the driveway. The lawn Eleanor had tended, still scattered with the last leaves of fall. The faded sunflowers she painted on the mailbox. I shut off the engine and sat in silence, memories flooding me until I could hardly breathe. I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I stood beneath the porch awning, watching rain gather in the gutters, remembering the day Micah was born, how I'd paced the same porch with nervous energy, praying I wouldn't mess things up for my new family. I thought about every late-night shift, every Saturday spent sanding and painting, every loan I'd taken to send Micah to college so he could have the kind of life I'd only dreamed of. And yet, somewhere along the way, all those sacrifices had twisted into expectations, and those expectations into resentment. I didn't know when my son had turned from a boy with sticky hands and wild dreams into a stranger who saw me only as an obstacle. But I knew now that the break had been final, as irrevocable as the shovel full of earth landing on Eleanor's coffin. Inside, the house was too quiet. I let the door close behind me and the old place creaked in the familiar way, but nothing felt secure anymore. On the mantel, the family photos told a story Micah seemed eager to erase. Eleanor beaming at Thanksgiving, Micah at his graduation, all of us together before Naomi ever appeared. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and lemon oil, the leftovers from a life that had always been built around someone else's needs. I took off my damp coat and hung it on the hook Eleanor had made, thinking it was ridiculous to care about something so small now. I walked the rooms as if seeing them for the first time. The worn rug where Micah took his first steps, the cracked Formica table where I signed mortgage checks with trembling hands, the faded pencil marks in the hallway, each line marking Micah's growth, each one a silent promise that I'd do whatever it took to give him more. I thought about the time we'd built a treehouse together, how proud he'd been, how he swore he'd never move out, how I believed him. A bitter smile twisted my lips. The house felt colder than ever as I stood by the window, watching headlights flicker past. A few weeks ago, Eleanor had sat in her chair by the fire, too weak to stand, but determined to plan one last Thanksgiving. She told me she was proud of the life we'd built together, even if the world didn't see it. She squeezed my hand, her fingers already bones beneath soft skin. "Alan, whatever happens after I'm gone, don't let them take this from you," she whispered. I promised, not knowing what she'd heard or feared, but now those words haunted me. I spent the next hours pacing the hall, feeling anger bloom inside me like a slow fire, not just at Micah and Naomi but at myself for believing that if I just gave enough, loved enough, it would always be repaid in kind. I realized how naive that was. I realized that the world wasn't interested in sentiment, only in what could be measured and sold. My phone buzzed just after midnight. A text from Micah, "We need to talk soon. For your own good." No pretense, no apology. Just a deadline. I stared at the screen until the words blurred, then set the phone face down on the kitchen table and made myself a cup of black coffee, the way Eleanor liked it. I stayed up all night, sifting through old files, mortgage statements, insurance forms, deeds. Relics of a life that, until now, I'd assumed would outlast me. I thought about the conversations Micah and I would have to have, the ones I never wanted, about aging, about independence, about what comes next. I thought about what I would do, who I could trust, if I really was alone in this world now. For the first time since Eleanor's diagnosis, I felt something other than fear or grief. I felt the beginnings of a plan. When dawn finally broke, painting the kitchen in pale gold, I poured myself another cup of coffee and stood at the window, looking out over the street. I saw the world with new eyes, a world where nothing could be taken for granted, where love and loyalty were as fragile as the roses Eleanor once planted beneath the window. And as the morning light caught the silver in my hair, I realized Micah and Naomi had made one mistake. They'd underestimated the old man. They didn't know it yet, but this story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Something was coming for them, as sure as winter follows fall, and this time it would be me holding the cards. The old house seemed to breathe with me, drawing in the cold air of another morning, releasing it in tired sighs through the rattling vents and creaking floorboards. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of black coffee going cold in my hands, the walls around me holding more memory than warmth. I'd slept in Eleanor's chair, just as she had during her last months, head bowed to the world, as if listening for something lost. The faint scent of her lavender lotion lingered on the old upholstery, and the presence of her absence pressed heavy against my chest. As sunlight edged across the window, catching on the faded linoleum and worn Formica countertops, I let myself drift backward in time, to the very bones of this place. I could see her there, younger, hair tied up in a bandana, sleeves rolled, a smudge of paint on her cheek as she mapped out what would become our kitchen. She wanted the morning sun, always the sun, and the coffee maker close by. She was never too proud to get her hands dirty, never afraid to start over, no matter how tired. 40 years ago, we built this house together with nothing but hope, muscle, and a little borrowed money. Weekends were a symphony of power tools, laughter, curses, and midnight pizza runs when we were too sore to cook. I saw her smile when we hung the crooked cabinet, the way she ruffled Micah's hair when he dropped a screwdriver behind the stove and cried because he thought he'd ruined everything. She always said there was beauty in imperfection, that the story mattered more than the polish. My hands had grown clumsy over the years, joints stiff and unreliable, but I could still feel the ghost of those younger days in my muscles. The burn of carrying 2x4s from the truck, the deep ache after hammering the last nail at midnight because we'd promised each other a roof before the rain came. Those promises, built into the walls, seemed to echo in the hush of morning. I traced the scar in the kitchen doorframe where Micah, at 6, crashed his bike through, blood running down his shin, eyes wide with terror. Eleanor knelt, pressed a towel to his cut, then to his tear-streaked face. I'd carried him to the ER in the old Ford, heart pounding the whole way, afraid of losing the boy who was everything to us. Even then, our life was never perfect. We fought over money, over time, over the stubbornness that lived in both our bones. We patched things with apologies and the shared rituals that became the rhythm of our years. Pancake Saturdays, lawn chairs in the driveway during summer storms, the first fire each autumn, that little tin box where we kept every letter Micah wrote home from college. It's strange, the way time polishes even the hardest edges, how the worst years blur into the ones you'd give anything to live again. Now, every inch of this house was a memory. Every photo on the mantel told a story Micah seemed determined to forget. I studied the family portrait from his high school graduation, the way he leaned into Eleanor, my arm wrapped awkwardly around both of them. There were Christmas mornings, birthday cakes, Halloween pumpkins lined up by the stoop, Eleanor's neat handwriting on 100 sticky notes that cluttered the fridge. I'd give anything to hear her call from the garden, asking if I wanted lemonade or if I remembered to buy milk. She was always the anchor, the reason, the stubborn hope that kept me moving even when the world got dark. I thought about how quickly things had changed, how a single diagnosis could turn everything upside down. Eleanor's illness had crept in slow at first, vague complaints, a tiredness that lingered, and then, like a thief, it took everything at once. I remember the way the doctors spoke in soft voices, how Micah's face paled in the hospital room when the word cancer first landed. He'd hugged his mother so tightly, promising to be there for every appointment, every test, every treatment. For a while, we were a family again, united by fear and love, the old wounds bandaged by a crisis we could not outwork. But fear makes people selfish, and time wears down even the strongest intentions. By the 3rd round of chemo, Micah's visits became hurried, phone calls replaced dinners, and excuses replaced presents. Naomi rarely came inside, and when she did, she looked at our life like it was a costume she'd never put on. Still, I hoped. Still, I believed. It was Eleanor who saw things clearly. She watched Micah with a mother's eyes and saw the distance growing. She squeezed my hand one night, whispering that love was no guarantee, that family could be lost just as easily as health. I poured another cup of coffee and forced myself to eat toast, the stale taste scratching my throat. My phone buzzed on the table, startling me. I reached for it, heart thumping with an old, useless hope that it would be Micah calling to apologize, to say he was sorry for yesterday, that he loved me, that he missed his mother. But it was only a reminder about a doctor's appointment I'd scheduled months ago and forgotten. I deleted it without thinking. Mid-morning, the silence became too much. I walked through the house, touching the banister Eleanor sanded smooth, running my fingers over the wall where Micah's childhood heights were marked in pencil. Their 3rd grade just before he broke his arm playing football. Their senior year taller than me, proud and impatient. I remembered the last time he slept in his old room, the night before college, the smell of new books and laundry detergent in the air. I'd watched him, wanting to say 1,000 things and failing, just telling him I was proud. The sun crept higher, casting rectangles of light onto the wood floors. I wandered into the garage, the smell of oil and sawdust thick in the air. Eleanor's gardening tools hung neatly where she'd left them. My own workbench was cluttered with half-finished projects, evidence of all the plans I'd made and never completed. I found myself reaching for an old toolbox, running my hand over the faded letters of my name. I remembered the promise I'd made to Eleanor at the hospital, that I would never let this place be taken, that I would stand my ground even if the world turned against me. I moved to the backyard, crunching over the frosted grass. The roses Eleanor had planted were stripped bare by winter, stems black and spindly against the pale sky. She'd named every bush, each one a tribute to someone she'd loved, a friend, a parent, even the neighbor's dog. She was sentimental in a way I never allowed myself to be, but I understood her reasons now. These things were anchors, reminders that we mattered, that our story counted for something, even if no one else remembered. From the yard, I could see into Micah's old bedroom window, the curtains Eleanor sewed still hanging. I wondered if he remembered the nights we read him to sleep, the arguments over homework, the tears after his first heartbreak. It was impossible to believe that the same boy could become the man who now plotted to take everything for himself. But the truth was undeniable. Grief exposes the cracks that were always there. I had just been too blind to see them. Inside again, I opened the little tin box on the bookshelf and pulled out Micah's letters from college. His handwriting changed over the years, from bold loops to hurried scrawl, the tone shifting from excitement to impatience as life demanded more from him. I read them now, searching for signs of the boy I'd raised, the one Eleanor always forgave. My hands shook as I folded each letter, the pain raw and familiar. At the bottom of the box, tucked between birthday cards and Father's Day notes, I found an old photo. Micah, 10 years old, standing in the snow with a lopsided grin, a hand-me-down jacket too big for his arms. I held it for a long time, letting the memory warm the empty spaces inside me. Afternoon blurred into evening, the house growing colder as the light faded. I made myself dinner, something simple, eating at the same table where we'd celebrated every milestone, where Eleanor used to laugh at my jokes no one else found funny. Her chair sat empty, a silent witness to what was gone. I tried not to think about what tomorrow would bring, about the conversation I would have with Micah and Naomi, about what it would mean to fight for what was mine. Fear gripped me, sharp and relentless, but beneath it was something else. Resolve, a stubborn will I'd forgotten I possessed. I went to bed early, but sleep did not come. I lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, the wind rattling the old windows. I imagined Eleanor's voice, steady and kind, telling me not to give up. I promised her again, in the quiet of my heart, that I would not let them erase us. I would not let my love be counted in dollars and square footage. Long after midnight, I rose and walked the house one last time, turning off lights, checking locks, pausing in each room as if to say goodbye and thank you. In the hallway, I stopped by the photo of our family on vacation in Myrtle Beach, the sunburn on Micah's nose, Eleanor's hair whipping in the breeze. I smiled, and for the first time in days it was real. As the sky lightened, I knew I would fight. I knew that no matter how much they wanted to rewrite history, the truth lived here. In the walls, in the garden, in every scar and laugh and sleepless night. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the storm I could feel brewing. But tonight, at least, I belonged to the life I'd built, and that was enough to keep going. The next morning, a low mist clung to the front lawn as I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for the inevitable. I didn't bother with breakfast, the knot in my stomach making food pointless. I kept checking the clock, watching the hands crawl toward 8:30, feeling the quiet dread that had taken root inside me since Eleanor's funeral. I tried to distract myself by flipping through the bills and papers scattered across the table, but my eyes kept drifting to the photo of Eleanor at the lake. Her laugh frozen in time, hair blowing wild, eyes shining in the sun. She had always been the bridge between Micah and me, softening my edges, making peace when tempers ran hot. Now the space she left behind felt like a canyon, too wide to cross. I heard the knock before I saw them. Micah never used to knock, not even as a boy. He'd come barreling through the door with muddy boots, calling for cookies or bandages or some spare part for a project. But today, the knock was measured, almost businesslike. I took a deep breath and answered the door, bracing myself. Micah stood on the porch in a charcoal suit, his hair slicked back, jaw tight. Beside him, Naomi looked every inch the executive's wife. Tailored jacket, manicured nails, sunglasses hiding her eyes even on a gray Ohio morning. She offered a thin smile, but it didn't reach her lips. Micah didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped past me, heading straight for the living room as if he already owned the place. Naomi followed, scanning the hallway with practiced disinterest. I closed the door softly and steeled myself. The house seemed to shrink around us. The three of us crowded in a space that once held laughter and family and the chaos of real life. Now every sound felt amplified. The tap of Naomi's heels on hardwood, the creak of the old sofa as Micah sat down, the brittle rustle of papers as he opened his briefcase. Naomi set her purse on the coffee table, taking in the room as if she were appraising it for resale. Micah didn't waste time on pleasantries. He pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table toward me. "Dad, I want you to take a look at these documents." His voice was calm, but there was a steel in it, a practiced authority that made it clear he'd rehearsed this moment. Naomi smoothed her skirt, barely glancing at me. "We're here to help you make a transition," she said, the word landing like an accusation. "You shouldn't have to deal with the burden of this house alone. It's too much for one person." I stared at the folder. My name was printed at the top in sharp, cold letters. I opened it, hands shaking, and scanned the pages. Purchase agreements, waivers, a checklist of assets to be transferred. Even an application for a senior living community I'd never heard of. My eyes stung as I read the numbers. They were offering $5,000, barely enough to cover a year of groceries, let alone the 4 decades of blood and memory built into these walls. Micah's tone was gentle, almost patronizing. "Dad, this is what's best. Reginald's company is offering more than the market value for a place like this. They're being generous, considering the renovations it would take to bring it up to code." I tried to swallow the bitterness, but it caught in my throat. Naomi watched me with the cold patience of someone waiting for a signature, not a decision. "Sunset Pines is a wonderful place," she added. "You'd have your own apartment, meals prepared, everything you need, and no worries about upkeep or safety. It's time to think about the future." I felt a wave of disbelief crash through me. Was this really my son? The boy who once begged me to build a treehouse, who stood beside me when Eleanor was sick, who promised her he would take care of me. He avoided my eyes now, busy straightening his tie, his voice clipped and professional. I could see it so clearly, how he'd convinced himself that this was mercy, that he was doing me a favor, not selling out his own father for a quick profit. A strange kind of anger pulsed beneath my skin, sharper than grief, colder than fear. I closed the folder and looked at them, searching their faces for any sign of the people I once knew. "You want me out," I said, my voice quieter than I intended, but steady. "You want to erase this house, everything we built, and turn it into cash for Reginald's next development. Is that it?" Naomi's lips tightened. "You're being dramatic, Alan. No one's erasing anything. You'll have a say in the process. But this house?" She gestured around, as if disgusted by the faded wallpaper and creaking floor. "It's just a place. Family is what matters." I almost laughed at the irony, but my hands curled into fists instead. Micah tried again, his tone almost pleading. "Dad, we can do this the easy way. If you sign the papers, you get the money, you get the apartment, and we all move forward. If not, there are other options. Code enforcement, zoning, legal channels. We don't want to drag this out." The threat wasn't even subtle. He was done pretending. The mask had dropped, and I saw him for what he was, a man who valued convenience over connection, profit over principle. The air in the room seemed to freeze. I stood, the chair scraping across the floor. For a moment, I thought about all the ways I could scream, rage, throw them out, but instead I straightened my back and forced my voice to calm. "You'll have my answer soon. I need time." Micah nodded, as if expecting this, but his relief was obvious. Naomi gathered her purse and stood, her perfume sharp and artificial. "We'll give you 48 hours, she said, glancing at Micah. "After that, Reginald needs a decision." They left without another word, the door swinging shut behind them. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the silence they left behind. My heart hammered in my chest, but beneath the panic, a cold clarity settled in. I could see the path they'd mapped out for me. Loneliness, dependence, a slow fade into the background of my own story. But I wasn't ready to vanish, not yet. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to distract myself, sorted through old photos, dusted Eleanor's knickknacks, took a walk down the block. Every neighbor I passed offered condolences, a casserole, or a careful question about how I was holding up. I thanked them, kept my head down, and lied. No one needed to know that my own son was circling like a vulture. By evening, the weight of everything threatened to crush me. I sat at Eleanor's desk, hands trembling as I sifted through documents. Deed, insurance, tax records, old receipts tucked into envelopes, yellowed with age. I needed to know what I had, what I was up against. I found her reading glasses, still perched beside a crossword she'd never finished. And for a moment, I could almost hear her voice. Don't let them take what we built, Alan. Fight for it. For me. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the windows, replaying the day's conversation in my mind. I kept thinking about the way Micah looked at the house, like it was already gone, a relic from a life he no longer wanted. I realized, with a shiver, that he didn't want my memories. He wanted the land, the potential, the payout. I woke at dawn with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. My mind worked through every scenario, every option, every possible defense. I thought about Eleanor's friend, Margaret Jensen, the real estate lawyer who'd helped us refinance after the recession. I wondered if she could help now. I made a list of questions, printed every document, checked dates and signatures, traced the chain of ownership back to the very day we closed on the house. Before noon, I picked up the phone and dialed Margaret's number. Her voice, warm and no nonsense, was a balm after so much cold calculation. She listened, asked careful questions, and promised to review everything I sent. Alan, you have more power than you think, she said. Don't sign anything. Don't be intimidated. Let me look into it. I hung up and let out a shaky breath. For the first time in days, I felt something like hope flicker inside me. Not the naive hope that everything would be all right, but the sturdy, battered hope of a man who knows he's been cornered but still has teeth. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, Eleanor's photo beside me, and began to write. Every memory, every promise, every reason I could find to hold on. I wrote for hours, stopping only when my hand cramped, pushing through the pain until I had a letter I knew she would be proud of. I folded it, placed it in the tin box with Micah's old letters, and hid it away in the spot only Eleanor and I ever knew. As the sun dipped behind the houses across the street, I turned on the porch light, made myself another cup of coffee, and waited. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I wasn't alone. Eleanor's love, our story, and the hard-earned lessons of a lifetime stood with me. The old man they thought they could erase still had some fight left. A slow rain fell the next day, streaking the windows and painting the street in muted silver. I woke early, the old ache in my back reminding me I hadn't slept well, but there was a new current beneath my bones. I moved quietly through the house, coffee brewing strong, my mind turning over possibilities like a river smoothing stones. I sat with the mug warming my hands, Eleanor's photo propped in front of me, as if I needed her permission for what I was about to do. I reviewed every document, every receipt, every mortgage statement again, searching for weaknesses, for cracks that could widen under pressure. The anxiety was different now, shot through with a strange resolve, because this was not the fear of a man about to lose everything. This was the sharpening of instinct, a lesson built over decades of surviving hard times and harder men. When Margaret called back, her voice steady and calm, it steadied me too. She had looked through everything I sent and outlined my options in clear, direct language. There was no easy path, no loophole that would grant me a magical escape. But there were ways to fight, ways to slow the hands trying to pull apart what we'd built. What struck me most was how she never spoke down to me. She reminded me of Eleanor, her ability to face things straight on and never sugarcoat what was hard. Margaret suggested a transfer, a gift of the house to a charitable foundation, one that specialized in cancer research, one that would let me keep living here as long as I breathed. She explained that such a transfer was legal and binding, protected against predatory lawsuits or forced sales, and she knew the right people to contact. My chest tightened with gratitude and surprise at the elegant simplicity of it all. I thought of Eleanor's long fight with illness, of her wish to leave something behind that mattered. I saw the way her garden, even wilted by winter, carried on her spirit. I said yes. Margaret started the wheels turning. The following day, I drove into downtown, the roads slick with rain, the radio playing softly as a comfort more than a distraction. I stopped in front of the tall, modern building that housed the Hope for Tomorrow Foundation. The lobby was bright, filled with paintings and children's drawings, and the air carried the hush of hope mingled with grief. I gave my name at the desk, and soon I was ushered into a room with a wide window looking out over the city. Margaret met me there with a folder already prepared. She introduced me to Mr. Chun, the foundation's legal director, who explained in plain language how my donation would work. The house would belong to the foundation, but I would have the right to live in it as long as I lived. When my time was done, the value would go to cancer research in Eleanor's memory. I signed my name with hands steadier than I'd expected. The pen moved across the page with a finality that was not loss, but victory. There was no fear as I pressed the last page flat and handed it back to Mr. Chun, who promised to send the confirmation as soon as the documents were recorded. Margaret smiled and put a hand on my shoulder, grounding me in the reality of what I'd done. I walked out into the parking lot as the rain eased, a thin pale sun breaking through the clouds. For the first time in weeks, my step felt light. Back home, I looked at the walls with new eyes. They were safe now, not because they were beyond reach, but because I had finally acted, finally chosen something bigger than my pain or my fear. That night I made dinner for one, poured a small glass of Eleanor's favorite wine, and sat by the window as dusk came on. The house was quiet, but not empty. I felt her presence, warm and proud, watching over me. Micah called that evening, his tone clipped and impatient. He wanted to know if I was ready to sign. I let him talk, listened to the litany of reasons why this was best for everyone, why resistance was pointless. He barely mentioned Eleanor, as if her memory had already faded to a technicality. I told him I'd like to have him and Naomi for dinner. "Let's talk this through as a family," I said, letting my voice tremble with just enough vulnerability. I could almost hear Naomi in the background, hissing something urgent, and Micah reluctantly agreed. 6:30 tomorrow night. The next day was a strange calm. I spent the morning in the garden, cutting back dead stems and tying up what roses I could save from the frost. I worked slow and careful, letting my thoughts drift. I cooked Eleanor's pot roast, the recipe we'd perfected together, with extra garlic and a splash of red wine. I set the table with her good china, polished the silver, even lit the candles she used for special occasions. The house smelled of comfort and memory, of love and pride and stubborn refusal to be erased. At 6:25, Micah's car rolled up, spotless and black against the curb. Naomi stepped out first, wrapped in a crisp gray coat, scanning the house with the same calculation I'd seen at the funeral. Micah followed, briefcase in hand, looking not at the house but at the front door, his eyes narrowed and set. I let them in, ushering them to the dining room with polite, distant warmth. Naomi barely hid her impatience, her phone always within reach. Dinner was a strange performance. They picked at the food, offered empty compliments, and discussed their new plans for the property as if I was a bystander, not the reason any of it existed. Micah spoke of opportunities, of the market, of the inevitable need for change. Naomi laid out her vision for renovations, what would need to be torn down, which features to keep for the sake of nostalgia. I listened, nodded in the right places, and watched the arrogance grow with each course. Finally, as dessert was cleared, Micah opened his briefcase and produced the papers, contracts, checks, a pen set down with a little flourish. "We can do this tonight, Dad. Quick and painless." Naomi smiled, already victorious. I stood, walked to Eleanor's old desk, and returned with my own folder. I laid it in the center of the table and slid it across, letting them see the foundation seal, the official signatures, the stamp that proved what had already been done. The silence that followed was more profound than any argument. Naomi stared, her mouth opening and closing. Micah's hand froze halfway to the contract. "The house isn't mine to sell anymore," I said, my voice calm, steady, older and stronger than I'd ever sounded to them. "It belongs to Hope for tomorrow. I have the right to live here for as long as I want. And when I'm gone, every dollar goes to cancer research in Eleanor's name." The words landed with a weight I could almost taste. Micah's face twisted with disbelief, then anger, then something close to fear. Naomi was quicker, already reaching for her phone, muttering about lawyers and legality, but the panic in her voice betrayed her. I waited as they flipped through the documents, their composure slipping with every line they read. There was nothing left for them to do. The deal was done, ironclad, protected by law, insulated by every safeguard Margaret and Mr. Chun could muster. Micah's voice broke when he finally spoke. He accused me of betrayal, of selfishness, of prioritizing a dead woman over the living. Naomi called me a fool, a sentimental old man clinging to the past. But for once, their anger felt hollow, powerless. I looked at them, not with hate, not even with pity, but with the quiet certainty of a man who knows he has done the only thing left to do. They left in a storm of cold fury, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. I watched their car disappear down the street, the shadows of evening stretching over the lawn Eleanor once tended. I cleaned the kitchen, washed the dishes, folded the good linen napkins and put them away. As I stood in the doorway, the air heavy with the scent of pot roast and the echo of old laughter, I felt not sadness, but something close to peace. The storm they had brought to my life had broken against a wall I built from love, memory, and a hard-won understanding of what really mattered. I hadn't just saved the house. I had protected the only thing that couldn't be measured in dollars. The story of a life lived well, of promises kept, of a love that refused to die. The fight wasn't over, not in their eyes, but for the first time I didn't care what they did next. Night arrived with a hush so absolute it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I wandered the rooms, straightening framed photos, smoothing the edges of Eleanor's quilt on the bed, moving with the slow, deliberate care of someone expecting a reckoning. My chest was tight, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was the tension of waiting for a storm I'd called down with my own hand. In the kitchen, I set out the last of Eleanor's good china, polishing the rims, lining up the silverware just so, letting memory guide my hands. The smell of her pot roast lingered from earlier, mingled with rosemary and onion, a scent that wrapped around me like comfort and sorrow both. I could almost see her leaning against the counter, hair pinned up, humming under her breath as she checked the oven. It was past 6 when the headlights flashed across the living room window. I stood by the front door, listening to the crunch of tires over gravel, the car engine cutting out, 2 doors slamming in the night air. My heart drummed, not just with anticipation but with a deeper ache for what had been lost and what I'd found the resolve to keep. I breathed slow and deep, remembering Eleanor's words in the hospital, how she had pressed my hand and said, "Don't let them take the best of us. Stand for something that lasts." Micah and Naomi stepped inside as if nothing had happened between us, as if the previous days had been a misunderstanding, a rough patch that could be paved over with a handshake. Naomi's voice was bright, forced, praising the aroma from the kitchen, making small talk about the weather, her tone brittle as glass. Micah seemed tense, distracted, scanning the house, pausing on the family portraits as if searching for some piece of leverage he'd missed. I welcomed them like any father would, my smile practiced and warm, never letting the cold beneath show through. We moved to the dining room, the table set as for a holiday, Eleanor's linens crisp and blue beneath the glow of the chandelier. Dinner was quiet at first, the 3 of us picking through roast beef and potatoes, sipping from heavy glasses, all the old rhythms but none of the old comfort. Naomi complimented the wine, asked if I'd ever thought about selling the silver, mentioned how her interior designer might love to see the place. Micah answered in half-sentences, distracted, not looking me in the eye. They expected something from me, A surrender, a breakdown, a last desperate plea. But I just asked about their week, listened with a patience I learned from a lifetime of letting the world talk past me. I could see them waiting for me to crack, to say I'd changed my mind, to beg for compromise. As dessert ended, the tension broke. Naomi excused herself, said she needed to take a call, and stepped out onto the porch, her heels clicking like a metronome counting down the last seconds. Micah finally looked up, a faint sheen of sweat at his temples, hands clenched around his water glass. He started in on the script he'd prepared, explaining again why this was for the best, how the market was shifting, how developers were circling like sharks. His voice was softer, as if he wanted to believe what he was saying, as if he needed my blessing more than my signature. I listened, and when he finished, I pushed my chair back, rose slowly, and retrieved the folder from the cabinet by the mantel. My fingers brushed Eleanor's old garden gloves, tucked away for safekeeping, and I felt her strength steadying mine. I placed the folder on the table, flipped it open so the foundation's letterhead caught the light. The silence that followed was thicker than any argument. I watched Micah's face change as he read, the color draining from his cheeks, his jaw working like he wanted to spit out the truth but couldn't find words sharp enough. Naomi came back in, snapping her phone shut, her voice still sharp from whatever conversation she'd left behind. She looked at the documents, her eyes darting across the pages, calculating, searching for a loophole. Her mouth twisted in disbelief as she realized what had been done, what couldn't be undone. I told them plainly, no anger, no apology. The house belonged now to the Hope for Tomorrow Foundation. I would remain here as long as I lived. When I was gone, the value would go to cancer research in Eleanor's name, a living legacy that no developer, no amount of money, could erase. Micah's anger boiled over then, his words tumbling out, accusing me of betrayal, of putting a dead woman's wishes above my own family. He demanded to know how I could do this, how I could throw away the one chance he had to make something of his life. I listened, and when he was finished, I said only that I was keeping my promises, that he had every opportunity to build something of his own, that what we'd built here was never meant to be torn down for profit. I told him he'd chosen his path, and I'd chosen mine. Naomi threatened lawsuits, said they'd contest the paperwork, find a way to reverse what had been done. But there was nothing left for them. Margaret had seen to that. Every signature, every page, every timestamp and witness, all ironclad and final. They were powerless in the face of a decision made not out of spite, but out of love and memory and the certainty that some things cannot be sold. Their defeat was quiet, almost dignified. They stood, collected their things, and for a moment, Micah looked at me with something like regret, or maybe just the hollow grief of a man who's lost something he never really understood. Naomi left first, her anger sharper now, a promise that this wasn't over, that she would find another way. Micah paused by the door, his hand on the knob, his face etched in shadow. He whispered that he hoped I was happy, that maybe one day I'd understand what I'd done. After they left, I sat at the table a long time, the house silent but for the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I thought about the shape of victory, how it sometimes comes not with cheers but with an empty house, with the weight of loneliness, with the memory of love that's gone. I walked through the rooms, touched the photos, smoothed the linens, let the peace settle over me in slow waves. In the garden, the roses Eleanor planted had survived another winter. I knelt beside them, brushed the soil from my hands, and whispered her name. The lights from the neighbors' houses glowed warm and distant, the air thick with the scent of rain and cut grass. I closed my eyes and let the pain of the night pass through me, let the silence of my home become not a void, but a shelter. The world outside would go on, with its noise and greed and hurry, but within these walls, I had kept a promise, turned loss into something lasting. I had become the keeper of a flame that would not be put out, not by time, not by anger, not even by my own failing body. As I made my way back inside, I paused in the doorway, the weight of the years sitting gently on my shoulders. There was no parade, no fanfare, no one to witness what had been won. But I felt Eleanor with me, as clear as if she stood beside me, and I knew that whatever happened next, this would always be our home. For the first time in months, I slept through the night, the fear gone, the house at peace, the fight behind me. Dawn crept over the rooftops in a pale hush, coloring the kitchen window with a cold, clean light. I sat at the table, a mug of coffee in my hands, steam curling up and dissolving into the silence. The events of the last week washed over me in slow waves. The betrayal, the confrontation, the hollow victory. I was left with a house that echoed with memory, a life split in two, the past and whatever came next, divided by a line I could never uncross. The house was still but not lifeless. I heard the gentle tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, the distant groan of wood settling in the walls, and in all of it, the faintest trace of Eleanor's laughter in the morning, the soft pad of her footsteps as she went about her day. It would have been easy to mistake peace for emptiness. I let myself linger in that moment, soaking in the rare comfort. I had not expected the world to go quiet after the storm, nor had I realized how accustomed I'd become to fighting, how the ache of struggle could replace the ache of loss. My thoughts circled around Micah and Naomi, their final words still ringing in my ears, the anger in their eyes, the bitter disappointment, the sense that they had not only lost what they wanted, but had been denied a story where they won. I wondered if they would ever forgive me. I wondered if I would ever forgive them. There was a part of me, honest and raw, that missed my son more than I missed anything else, that wished for a different ending. One where love could bridge every gap, where the years did not pile up between us like bricks in a wall. I stood, stretched, and moved through the house, touching each space as if to remind myself that this was not a dream. The photographs on the mantel glimmered in the new light. Micah's gap-toothed grin at 6, Eleanor's hand on my shoulder at our first Christmas here, family dinners, summer afternoons, moments pressed into glossy paper that could never quite hold their weight. I ran my finger along the frame, each memory sharp and sweet. As the day wore on, I found small things to do. Sweeping the front porch, tending the faded roses in the backyard, sorting the stack of letters I'd written but never sent. Each task was a way of reclaiming the world, of insisting that what mattered most was not what had been taken from me but what I refused to give up. The phone rang a few times. Neighbors checking in, a nurse from the clinic reminding me of an upcoming appointment, Margaret with a brief update about the paperwork, her voice reassuring and strong. But not a word from Micah. Evening fell softly, and the old ache of loneliness began to creep in. I made a simple dinner and ate in silence, watching the streetlights flicker on outside, the world turning gold and blue beyond the glass. I tried to imagine what Micah was doing now, whether he and Naomi had found comfort in their certainty, or whether the loss had begun to gnaw at them, as loss always does when anger recedes. I tried not to dwell on it, but the questions pressed in, stubborn as weeds. After I washed the dishes, I wandered through the living room, the floor cool beneath my bare feet. I opened the tin box on the bookshelf, took out the letter I'd written to Eleanor the night before the confrontation, and read it slowly, savoring every word. It was a confession, a promise, a kind of prayer. I told her about the battle, the victory, the price. I told her I wished things had been different, that I missed her laughter, that I hoped she was proud of me. When I finished, I tucked the letter back in the box, feeling the gentle press of her spirit beside me. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat by the window, staring out into the yard. The roses were dark shapes against the fence, the grass silvered by moonlight. I remembered the first spring we spent here, Eleanor planting bulbs with her hands in the cool earth, determined to bring color to every corner. I remembered Micah's delight when the first blossoms appeared, his shouts echoing through the yard. There was a time when everything felt possible, when home meant safety and belonging, not a prize to be claimed or defended. As I sat, the memories rose around me, fierce and unyielding. The day Eleanor told me she was sick, the night we danced in the kitchen to a scratchy old record, Micah's graduation, Eleanor's final breath, the moment the house grew unbearably quiet. I let myself grieve, let the sadness flow through me without resistance. For the first time since she died, I didn't try to fill the silence or chase away the ache. I let it settle, like a truth too deep for words. The days that followed moved in a new rhythm. I woke early, fixed breakfast, checked the mail, tended the house. I wrote letters to Micah I never sent, words that tried to make sense of everything, that asked forgiveness, that offered love even when it felt hopeless. I began to see neighbors again, to answer the door when they knocked, to join Mrs. Flannery for coffee, to accept invitations for Sunday dinner. I began to reclaim my place in the world, a little at a time. Sometimes I would find myself watching the road, waiting for Micah's car, hoping against hope for a reconciliation, a second chance. It never came. Naomi sent a curt email, asking for documents and family records. I answered politely, sending what was needed, but never more. Our conversations were careful, clipped, as if neither of us wanted to admit the depth of what had been lost. In rare moments, I saw Micah at the grocery store, his face drawn and tired, his voice quiet. We exchanged awkward pleasantries, a shadow of the easy laughter we once shared. The distance between us remained, an ocean of pride and regret. On the first anniversary of Eleanor's death, I walked to the community garden, a gift from the foundation, built in her name. There were flowers blooming everywhere, pink and yellow and white, tended by hands that never knew her but carried her legacy forward. I knelt in the soft earth, let the sun warm my back, and whispered thanks. I understood, at last, that legacy is not just what we leave behind, but how we live, how we forgive, how we love despite everything. That evening, back in the house, I found a letter tucked behind a stack of old recipes. Eleanor's handwriting, familiar and looping, addressed to me. She must have hidden it away before the end. A last message for a day she knew would come. I sat at the kitchen table, heart pounding, and read her words. She spoke of hope, of courage, of believing in what mattered most. She reminded me that love outlasts even the deepest wounds, that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves. She told me she was proud, that she trusted me to carry on, that home was not just a place but the sum of every sacrifice, every moment of grace. The house felt different after that, not empty, but alive with her blessing. The fear that had gripped me, the loneliness, the doubt, all of it eased. I understood, finally, that justice is not always loud or triumphant, that sometimes it is simply the quiet certainty of having done what is right, no matter the cost. I went to bed that night with the windows open, letting in the sound of the wind, the scent of the garden, the peace of a battle well fought. The world did not stop for my story. There were still bills to pay, groceries to buy, small aches that came with age. But something fundamental had changed. I no longer saw myself as a victim or a survivor, but as a keeper of memory, a guardian of what could not be bought or sold. I saw Micah not as an enemy, but as a man lost in his own ambitions, worthy of compassion if not trust. I saw Eleanor everywhere. In the light, the laughter, the way the house stood strong against the winter wind. Some nights I still woke with the old ache, missing the sound of her voice, the promise of reconciliation. But more often, I slept easy, knowing that in the end, I had kept faith with the life we built, the love we shared, the promise I made. The story was not a tidy one, nor did it offer the comfort of easy endings. But it was honest. It was true. I stood one last time by the roses, tracing the petals, whispering a prayer for forgiveness, for grace, for the strength to carry on. The house glowed with the golden light of dusk, and I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that some victories are measured not in what you win, but in what you refuse to lose. And sometimes that's enough.